Oftentimes, there is a misnomer that brands in the past had kind of negated the power of hesitant or negative reviews. And I purposely put hesitant because there's some that, and I do some of them myself, that I really, really love it, but this is just something to watch for. That's actually very good insight for not only the consumers, but also the manufacturers of the product. And it's been many occasions that we've been working with our customers where the brand said, oh my goodness, I actually love that. So we're going to put that as a part of the product development as well as the product design and improvement path.
You're listening to Retail Remix, your inside access to candid conversations with the people shaping retail's future. Here's your host, Alicia Esposito.
User-generated content, and more specifically, ratings and reviews, have been part of the social media equation for about a decade now. But of course, within that time, the social media landscape has evolved and expanded to not only include the written word, but photos and videos as well. And of course, we've seen merchants, brands, and retailers really try to optimize their UGC strategy. And that means bringing influencers into the fold, courting their most loyal and passionate consumers, and encouraging them to share their feedback and firsthand accounts to make the case for their brand and their products. But in August 2024, the landscape reached a tipping point of sorts. The Federal Trade Commission announced a final rule banning fake reviews and testimonials. Now, on the surface, this may seem like a no-brainer. The goal for any merchant is to present their brand and products in the best possible light, and that means providing accurate and comprehensive information around their products, how they work, and whether they really meet consumers' expectations. But like any channel that can be monetized, there are strategies that are kind of sketchy, to put it bluntly. And over time, we have seen brands court influencers, profitable customers, and really encourage them to share their feedback in a way that may not be the most ethical. And of course, with the rise of AI and agencies and tools designed to amplify quote-unquote authentic user-generated content, this entire ecosystem has gotten a little bit sticky. Now, I am only scratching the surface of this issue, so today I wanted to sit down with someone who is really immersed in this world of UGC. So today I have on the show Zarina Stanford, CMO of Bazaarvoice. Now, Bazaarvoice is a company that has been in this world of UGC for many, many years. So Zarina has a firsthand account of the trends that are happening, the issues that are emerging as this social media world gets more and more complicated, and really what this new ruling means for brands and retailers, especially as they build out their user-generated content strategies. Now, no matter where you are in your social media plans, UGC strategies, she is bringing to the table a lot of guidance, insights, and really tactical takeaways that you can apply. Zarina, thanks so much for being on the show. I am so excited. We have so much to get into, but first and foremost, appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is a very passionate topic of mine as well.
Yeah, and for those of you listening, we're going to be digging into the evolving world of UGC and reviews and how some new rulings that I'm sure all of you know about and have been digging into yourselves, how these new rulings will impact the future. But before we do that, I do think providing some background about you, Zarina, and your company, Bazaarvoice, is important. And I think it's critical context here. So can you share a little bit about your position in the space and how Bazaarvoice is helping brands and retailers?
Thank you very much for that. First of all, here at Bazaarvoice, I run as the Chief Marketing Officer, had been having a ball in terms of working with brands and retailers to really harness the voice of the individuals, particularly the shoppers, and consumers who, by the way, are the ones that we trust the most as fellow consumers about particular products. So in particular, Bazaarvoice work with brands and retailers to showcase user or creator-generated content as a part of expressing how their products or brands' products and the brand itself are being experienced by individuals like ourselves.
Yeah. And I know we have been talking about user-generated content and how brands can leverage the voice of the customer for quite a while at Retail Touchpoints. I know it's me personally, I'm very passionate about this topic. So Zarina, I have a feeling we're going to be geeking out a little bit here on our chat today. Arguably, this has all accelerated this space. You know, when Facebook became a viable marketing, advertising, and community building channel, when we used to think about VOC, it was like survey-based stuff, right? But now it's so much more dynamic and rich, and a lot has changed since that time. How are you seeing consumers use the Meta platforms and other communities to share their feedback and experiences? Because I feel like this network is very large now.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point that you just underscore, which is the way we behave as consumers and how we share and how we connect with each other are hugely done socially. And so therefore, in many, especially today's consumers, particularly if I may, and our study shows that, particularly the Gen Zs and the millennials, the first place they go to are actually social platforms. They really don't go to, in some cases, the stores or even your product page, your PDP page, your .coms for that matter. That may be the last place they go to before they're ready to purchase. And so this world of what I would refer to as the social first world is one that truly democratizes in terms of how we each feel about a particular product. And that lends brands phenomenal power and credibility as well as access, right, in terms of how their products can be related by other consumers in terms of how they are. And reviews is one example of it.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm curious, how have you seen the use cases for UGC ratings and reviews evolved on the brand and retailer side? Because what I find so interesting is, you know, it's one thing that consumers are sharing these experiences, they're sharing this feedback, but there is that big opportunity that's marketing opportunity, that's advertising opportunity, right? So how has that particular area of this space evolved?
Yeah, I think then first and foremost, I would say two things. In the old days, and when I say old days, a few years ago, when we talk about, well, let's check on the reviews, how many stars and what have you, we were back in those days still talking about text, right? You look at words. But today, it's all about visually how we're expressing the experience. So the visual, which is why social platform like Meta and others, Instagram in particular, right, and TikTok, are particularly appealing to both the consumer side as well as the brand side. So from that standpoint, right, we're looking at the total experience, whether you're hearing it, you're seeing it. In most particular case, in particular when it's personal items such as health and beauty or apparels, we as consumers want to see, how does this thing look on me? And how does it look on someone who looks like me? And that's a big part, and in particular in apparel, just how does it fit, right? And you can envision yourself with it. So this visual social piece of it is number one, most important. So what does it mean to brands and retailers? And I think in most cases, in particular, the thousands and the ones that we work with around the world, they are loving it and truly seeing this as a tremendous opportunity, especially if the products can be visually expressed. That is an additive. That is, if you're just looking at, in the old days, you have to look at a commercial, but most of us don't even go to TVs anymore. So you're now seeing real people using your product in a way that they want to express. Is really, really powerful. And here at Bazaarvoice, we talk about this concept of content supply chain. In what you just posited, in the sense that this is part of marketing, part of advertising, and part of it. At the heart of it is about the content. Traditionally, brands and retailers had always looked at branded content because we felt, and I'm one of those that fall into that trap as well too, right? We felt no one knows our product better than us, so we need to tell the world about them. But the world had completely flipped 180 degrees, and it's now all about what are consumers saying about the product. And to cite one of my friend and colleague in the space, and she's a CMO of a big beauty brand, and her plea is really the time is now to relinquish the control to the consumers because they do a much better job expressing and telling and informing, and for that matter, inspiring others consumers to buy, to shop, to continue to buy, and to be a loyal customer for that matter.
So many great points. I love that idea of the content supply chain. I do want to dig into this point you made around how UGC is part of marketing, it's part of advertising, and this may be a bit nuanced or nitpicky, but is it safe to say that brands and retailers should now have like UGC strategy as its own separate hub with a bunch of spokes, or is UGC simply part of broader marketing and advertising strategies? Like, how would you define that? Or does it really depend on the brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reality is that it's really twofold. For those, to your last point, the best way to do that is to think of user-generated content as a part of your entire content supply. It's almost to the point that if you can blend them together, in fact, I will give you an example. There are customers of ours, when they put user-generated content, particularly visual ones, onto the PDP, onto their .com product page, that page performs much, much better than when it doesn't have it, to the point that it could be 2x or 3x. It's a major, major multiplier. So that's one example of blending that, having the right mix. And that's why we refer to it as the content supply chain, which includes branded as well as user or creator generated organic, right, content. That makes it much more powerful and much more converting, as well as delivering what you might want it to have that experience be like, right, as a brand. Now, you also mentioned something which I love, which is there are occasions where user-generated content should really be a distinct strategy. I would first want to say is to my peers around the world, you must have a user-generated content. Even back in my days when I was at IBM and SAP, right, we're not in the B2C space, but the most powerful voice is that of the consumer. In our cases back then, is the voice of the customer. So leveraging your customers' voices along with your own to tell the story is the most impactful one. Whether you look at it as a content strategy, you look at it as a media strategy, you look at it as a channel strategy, because remember we talked about this being social and socially everywhere. It is really truly a channel strategy as well too. And if you combine it all, whether it's your paid or your earned or your owned strategy, it all comes together. So I would love for us to think as an industry that this is powerful content that can enrich not only your advertising strategy, but your own strategy, as well as, most importantly, your social strategy.
Got it. Some really good points there. And I know a lot of our conversation thus far has really focused on the user being everyday shoppers, like you and me, sharing our experiences, sharing our perspectives on quality, fit, how we're using the product, all of these other great messaging points, so to speak. But how has the rise and evolution of influencer marketing and, this more creator-led ecosystem impacted the resonance and value of UGC? Because on one hand, you see the data saying that consumers want to not only love to follow these creators, but they turn to them for ideas, recommendations, inspiration, and they take it like gospel, right? But then there are others that are saying, hey, listen, I know these people are making money from selling this stuff. I'm a little hesitant. I'm going to do my own research, or maybe I'm not going to trust them as thoroughly and as immediately as I used to. Are you finding any tension happening in the UGC space because of this dynamic that's happening right now?
Absolutely, yes. There's no doubt that this is a new world. And therefore, with new way of doing things, there's always going to be tension. And there's always going to be questions about should we or should we not? And if you would allow me to kind of expand on that. The rise of the influencer and creator space for marketing purposes is actually out of organic reasons, right? And it's exactly what you said, is that we always lean on how are other peers of ours thinking about word of mouth have been a marketing scheme and an advertising mechanism for thousands of years for that matter. And as some of these consumers getting to be very skilled and they begin to express themselves more, and they find themselves, oh my goodness, I actually love doing what I'm doing. And I could, in some cases, actually make a living out of it. And that's that entire spectrum. And as we refer it here at Bazaarvoice, you have the everyday shoppers. And then you have the everyday shoppers who are much more, and they're very proactive in sharing what they would like to share. And they fall into almost kind of categorically speaking, like influencers. They do so often and they do it enough that they become more skilled and they have followers and they're trusted, just like you said. Then there is, as this organic flywheel starts to happen more, then there are people, particularly if you can connect the dot to it, a lot of it really starts from the Asia space where I'm actually from, that they become so skilled and it's really actually entertaining and informing and inciting at the same time. And these forms the content creator's profession. My advice for number one for the brands is that you have to understand what each of these categories of individuals can help you advance whatever your business objectives may be. And the resonating to others like ourselves as consumers would be that if I'm consuming that piece of content, am I being informed? And do I have and can I trust that piece of content? Independent of where the source is. But as long as I know, number one, that it's a real person. And second, that it's really about the product that I'm of interest to, that I have the interest to look into. And then third is that if the person really has a bias, as an example, if the person is a creator or an influencer who happened to be gifted that product, or who actually even be compensated, the trade and the practice is to have that information be disclosed. And when you practice this, what I've also articulated, shared with you, is how we actually practice our authenticity policy here at Bazaarvoice, then you know it is the content that I know that I can trust and I know where the source is coming from. So it nets out to be understanding the different types and understanding the power, relative power of each of the sources, and acknowledge the fact that if there is a bias, that I know what it is, then as a consumer, I could feel informed, I could feel trusted, or I could feel like I can trust the content that I'm looking at. And I could simply use that as information to make me decide whether I'm going to purchase or not purchase. And on that point, I would also like to say too, is that oftentimes there is a misnomer that brands in the past had kind of negated the power of hesitant or negative reviews. And I purposely put hesitant because there's some that, and I do some of them myself, like, I really, really love it, but this is just something to watch for. That's actually very good insight for not only the consumers, but also the manufacturers of the product. And it's been many occasions that we've been working with our customers where the brand said, oh my goodness, I actually love that. So we're going to put that as a part of the product development, as well as the product design and improvement path. To the point that I will go all the way to the stretch here, that one of our customers in the consumer electronics space, they do not launch any product unless they actually have user or influencer or creator content that is available on that product first.
Got it. So many great points. And I love that you provided the point-by-point breakdown, so to speak. I do want to dig a little bit deeper into your point about negative reviews, because I agree. I think brands need to be thinking more holistically about the value that exists there, not just for the consumer, but also for their team as well. And that kind of leads me to, I guess, an adjacent point, which is like looking at the review experience holistically and like how that drives us as consumers. Because when I see like a mishmash of reviews, like, and there are some negative things or things to look out for, like that's helpful for me, like you noted. And then conversely, if there's almost too many positive reviews, like that kind of makes me a little hesitant. Like I'm like, is there something else going on here? So I guess looking at this holistically from the brand perspective. And I guess this mainly applies to like branded e-com. And I guess sometimes like in marketplaces, like there's always that like, oh, should we remove this review? Is it safe to say like that's not a good play, that there really does need to be a dynamic mix of reviews and UGC for this to be truly valuable for consumers, and that it could ultimately backfire if you do that?
Yeah, love that part. First thing, allow me to jump right to the point that you mentioned, that brand may has a tendency or a leaning towards should we even show that or not. And I think this is where I really wanted to shout out the recent regulation that has just been passed, that in the past, the FTC has advised that if you were to suppress negative reviews, it was to be not celebrated, right? And to the point that last year was the first time they actually began to levy penalty for a particular brand who actually was doing that deliberate practice. So I wanted to make sure there's a whole spectrum of not only is it not advisable, now with the official regulation coming through, it is actually illegal to do so. Projecting fake ones or suppressing deliberately negative ones fall into those categories. I think that's a really important part, first of all. And I do know that as businesses, most brands really, with very rare exceptions, would not do those practices deliberately. And hence why I felt that it's really powerful to have the guidelines and the regulations to say, these may be the things that you may want to think about, because that could be construed as deceptive advertising, right? It goes back to our talk about our conversation about, is this advertising and marketing? I think that's a very important point in terms of having the integrity and having the guardrails, as well as almost practically from a compliance standpoint. And one example that I really like often to use, because it's one that I have to be honest with you, when I really gotten into the role, and I'm even thinking myself, oh my God, I never even thought that that would be something that is potentially construed as fake review. And let me give you this example. The example was that there was a particular CPG product, and it has slightly different formula. So the taste, and I forgot whether it was about the taste or the actual ingredients changed. And in that case, it's still the same product. The question would be, should I use the reviews that was there and already available in the social space to tie to this new version of the product? That, with the new guidelines of the FTC, and if the practice that we advise in the industry is not a good practice, because that could be deceptive.
Okay.
That actually would fall into and what categorically is referred to review hijacking. And that is an absolute no-no.
That's actually a lot more nuanced and intricate than I initially was interpreting and thinking about these new guidelines, because, we've seen some, competing practices or brands that try to develop a review strategy, or they're maybe even targeting competitors. But this gets a lot deeper into, do the reviews, positive or negative, actually reflect the current state of the product itself? And could that be interpreted as misleading, or I guess misinformation, essentially, right? Because it's not like bad intent, but it could be interpreted as a negative experience.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to say bingo, because I had the same experience with your reaction, in the sense that as I'm learning more and getting deeper into that, it's just some things that we know that brands will not just do that deliberately. But it is good, right? And as advisors and as advisory partners to our brand customers, those are the kind of things that we would have the conversation with them. Now, it's very easily fixed, however, right? Because we could, and we oftentimes help customers do that. In fact, that when there is a new formula, you could consider that, and there's a scale of how much of that formula is changed for that matter. You could actually do something as in what we refer to as the product sampling space, that when there's a new formula, you want people to try it new, so that you know that the expectation from the consumers is, are there enough people talking about your product that I think I should think about it? And so we actually help them, especially when it's a new product launch or new version coming out, that we would help them. And in fact, in this case, is where some of those everyday shoppers who like to try new things, and as a result of trying it, or as an ask of trying it and getting the gift, that we just simply ask them, or the brand asks them to say, would you let the world know what you think? And that's where that conversation stops, right? The brand does not tell them what to say, because when the moment we begin to prescribe, that is also not a good practice in terms of authenticity.
Got
so
it.
when someone tries a product and then say, well, I'm going to go tell the world what I think about it, that helps that same manufacturer that we were just talking about as an example, right? To generate more volume and currency. In other words, the recency of content is always something to look at. And, for whoever's listening to the podcast, I'm going to ask us all to think back to, whatever the last time you may be buying something and you looked at a review, I'm going to bet that 9 out of 10 of us would look at the date of that review. Because if it's a year old, if it is, depending on what product it is, right? If it's day old, if it is 2 years old, we would instantaneously equate some credibility to it or lack of. So it isn't just whether it's there, whether you have enough of it, and whether how it's said, and if it truly reflects the product, as well as how recent was that theft.
No, these are some great points. So if we were to take a step back here and think contextually about how we got here, right? Like the reason for this ruling and, the actions that the FTC has taken, is it just because this landscape has gotten so complex and multifaceted, and that there needs to be some level of transparency and, I guess, greater management around the volume of content being created around products? Because, again, already we're kind of dissecting this layer by layer here. It's, new changes to product, where the consumer is buying the product, the fact that you can do these sampling programs, and that's one channel for reviews. And there's influencers, everyday shoppers, and then there are the more, for lack of a better term, malicious tactics that we have seen covered in the media around brands kind of going against each other. We won't name names. Is it just because it's just getting too unwieldy, and that there does need to be some standardization around how to best create and manage and, I guess, update these reviews and user-generated content for it to best serve the customer?
Yeah, I would say is really twofold. No doubt the volume of content, whether it's user generated or creator generated, as a part of many brands now marketing practice, is certainly one reason. But I would take a note to say that the FTC has been advising this practice or this notion for years. And in fact, Bazaarvoice, being a part of this community, has actually been in constant conversations with the FTC and with other entities as well for years as well. The most important part that started many, many years ago, and I will cite this, right? Abby Sherman on our team, who has been a member of the Bazaarvoice business for 13 years. And when she joined Bazaarvoice 13 years ago, that was already the conversation to say, how and what do we need to do to ensure these content are in fact authentic and therefore can be trusted? And the FTC has been in that conversation. So it is not a new thing from that standpoint, right? From the importance of it. A lot of it is really, if you think about the design of and the premise behind the FTC as well, is not only to manage trade and businesses, but it's also really to protect the consumers as well. And in that light, there are other organizations around the world, Omnibus and others, and outside also Consumers International, entities, whether it's public or NGO organizations, that have been really championing this very important topic. And certainly now with the rise of the whole creator economy, as well as, if I may say, the use cases being prolific about artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, is bringing the kaleidoscope coming together. But I don't know on that desk, but I would presume that the FTC has actually been looking at this. And in fact, we helped them, along with some other companies, preview some of the drafting of these regulations before it was announced, actually.
Wow, that's great.
2 months ago, yeah. It's a powerful thing, though, right? I mean, I think, Alicia, is that as you and I, as consumers, it's great to know that there are governance, there are thinking, and there is a collective ecosystem in the industry safeguarding, protecting both the brand from a brand safety standpoint, protecting each of us as consumers, as well as just to continue to protect the whole consumerism, if you will.
For sure. No, it's interesting that, you and other players were involved in this process, which I think is important, right? Looking beyond the four walls, so to speak, of your understanding and your knowledge of a particular space. But are there any other murky areas or murky details that you think will impact whether this ruling will lead to positive change or will be a force for good, so to speak? So you mentioned AI, for instance. Is there anything else that, you think the industry and the FTC really need to work through to determine this ruling success?
I think for us and most of the folks we talk to, brands and otherwise in the industry, it's definitely a very welcome approach. And it's a very welcome decision because it helps put things in black and white and protect those, particular consumers and other brands against those who are just maybe, kind of in that small spectrum to do some deliberate bad work. I think the other piece is really important is that especially with the rise of all the creator economy, so many conversations are being in that I would say if anyone who is thinking about using creators as well as becoming creators himself or herself, is really important to bring back to that total transparency and being truly authentic. In a conversation with one of the creators just about 2 months ago, the conversation was that I asked him, how does he decide what product he wants to represent or not? And I love what he said. He's basically saying is that I pick products based on whether it actually reflects me. And that's important for the consumers to consider. That's important for the brands to consider. And that's important for all of us in the industry as solution providers to be supporting that effort as well.
Got it. So to round out our conversation, Zarina, we talked about so much, and I think we could probably go on for another 2 hours or so. But Are there any big tips, best practices, even just general considerations for all the folks listening right now? Again, knowing that, this new ruling is in place, that it is going to be a time of evolution and learning. Anything that you would call out as far as what they can do to ensure that they're keeping pace, that they have the processes in place to align with some of these new requirements and parameters?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, always practice, and I really underscore the word practice, authenticity. Authenticity is being authentic and being truthful and thinking of trust in the front is not a nice to do. It's the must have. And therefore, just like in sports, just like in whatever conditioning that we want to do, it takes practice and make sure that you always adhere to that. And this is probably particularly for brands and any one of our peers in the marketing space and in the advertising space and the likes. I think that's number one. And second is that I think that there should not be any fear in terms of using what is truly the most trusted and preferred voices, i.e. that of the consumers and that of influencers and even creators. The hesitance, if there should be any, shouldn't be about whether we use them or not, but it's really about when we use them for what purpose and for what objectives. As an example, is creator content better for awareness versus that of reviews and ratings for final conversion? And we can talk about that another hour as well too. So that's the second part, is that don't be shy about using it. In fact, that's the only approach that I think it should be done from an optimized content supply chain perspective, but do so mapping to what it is that you want to achieve. And then lastly, I think that we should all think about this is all of us coming together. And the total relationship between brand and consumers have changed. And the only way to do that is to embrace that and fully take advantage of it from both the brand's perspective as well as from the consumer's perspective. We can get to a better world that way.
Love it. Well, Zarina, I have a feeling this is the first of many conversations we'll be having on this topic. But for now, thank you so much for taking the time out to join me today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Look forward to our further conversations.
And to all of you, I'm sure this conversation conversation has sparked a few follow-up questions or your own thoughts on this new ruling. It's definitely a big deal, I think, for the future of UGC and social commerce in general. So we'd love to hear from you. We will tag Zarina on our post for this episode on LinkedIn. That way, if you do have any follow-up questions for her, we'll make this a big old conversation. So definitely keep your eyes open for that. And of course, we want to hear your thoughts on this episode and the show as a whole. So leave us a rating or review on your preferred podcast player. And of course, be sure to subscribe to the show. That way you get the latest and greatest conversations delivered right to your device. But for now, folks, that is it from all of us. Thank you again so much for joining us. We will see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Retail Remix. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on your favorite podcast player. Until next time, keep mixing it up.